Welcome back to another edition of the Hart2Heart Podcast. And my guest today is another family doctor, Dr. Ted Naiman. So, Dr. Ted, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Family practice. Absolutely. You and me.
Absolutely. Family practice. We definitely need more of them in Canada. They probably need more of them in the States too. So, happy to have a like-minded family medicine MD on the podcast. I've had a lot of MDs on the podcast, but certainly not, too many in family medicine that are, I think aligned with our kind of thinking and what we like to talk about on social media and that kind of thing. So super pumped to chat with you today. So before I start asking you a few questions, Ted, can you just give the audience a little bit of a background about yourself?
Yeah, man. So I'm a primary care doctor, just like you. I live in Seattle, which is almost Canada, by latitude. And I just punch a clock for like a major medical center here. And my background is that I went to Loma Linda University, where they're very into plant-based diets. And so I had a lot of interest in is this really the best diet? What could be better or worse? And so I've been researching diet and exercise my whole career. And I'm just really geeked out on any evidence-based stuff that would basically help anyone figure out what to do with diet and exercise in terms of health outcomes. So that's kind of my background, and that's where I'm at.
Cool. And you also had a pretty big transformation. Like I saw a picture of you online when you were 35 versus when you were 50. So, how did that come about? Like, were you eating differently? Obviously, you were at 35. And then, what kind of made you want to make that transformation, and what tools did you use to make that transformation?
Yeah, it was really just getting a little more serious about diet and exercise. And at that point, my exercise was pretty much just body weight calisthenics, push-ups, pull-ups, squats, that kind of thing. And the diet was basically a very high protein, low carb kind of, paleo, keto, carnivore type thing. And that's kind of like, I was trying to lead by example. It's like, why could I expect any of my patients to do something that I'm not already doing? So I was trying to distill exercise down into the minimum effective dose and what gives you the highest return on the smallest investment when it comes to diet levers to pull and exercise strategies. And it was just a combination of trying a bunch of stuff and doing a lot of research and seeing what my patients were doing, what their outcomes were. And so I kind of came to this place where I'm at now, where it's basically just protein and lifting.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll definitely be talking a lot about protein and lifting today. But before we get into that, what do you think is the best tool for discovering how many calories someone should consume in a day?
Oh, how many calories should someone be consuming?
Like in terms of in calculating their basal metabolic rate and how many calories they're actually, burning in a day, their totally daily, energy expenditure. Is there a certain online tool that you use, or how do you sort of, get people to figure out how many calories they should actually consume in a day?
I absolutely don't. I never do that. I literally never prescribe any calorie amount to anyone ever at all. And in fact, the whole goal, I'm working with Andrea Seinfeld, and we have this Hava app, and it tracks literally everything, all your macros, all your calories, everything you eat, satiety per calorie. Still don't care about calories. Absolutely not looking at calories. Kind of doesn't matter. Why is that? Because you're going to eat to satiety no matter what. Let's say I told you you've got 1,300 calories today. That's your calories. I just told you how many calories you need. That's not helpful at all. If you blow through 1,300 calories by 10 a.m., you're still going to keep eating. You're hungry. You basically eat to satiety. You're going to eat to satiety. The question is, how many calories did you consume in that process? If it's more than you burned, then you're going to gain fat. If it's less than you burned, then you're going to lose fat. So I am more concerned with eat to satiety and then try to eat something that has fewer calories in that process than something else. And then how many calories that ends up being is infinitely variable based on your activity level. If you're training for an ultra and you're, running 150 miles a week, then that's going to be, 4 or 5 times higher than any calculation I could ever run. If you basically just sit on the couch 23 and a half hours a day, then I'm going to overestimate using any online calculator. So I don't really ever prescribe anything to do with calories for anyone. Now, macros, sure, I'll give somebody some ballpark macros. Definitely.
So would you tell people, say the average person, like, would you say like 40% protein, 30% carb, 30% fat, or is there like a ratio that you like to use? And would you use, say, different ratios, whether someone's wanting to lose fat, maintain, gain muscle?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my favorite cutting macros would be a 40, 30, 30, 40% protein, 30% carb, 30% fat, kind of split down the middle on the carb and fat side. And that's definitely, if you go to, proteinpercent.com, which is a website I have to support the PE diet book, there's a little calculator on there, and it'll basically give you enter your height, and it'll give you, a 40, 30, 30 macro breakdown for your ideal body weight based on your height. And so, yeah, I do like 40, 30, 30. I do like prescribing macros based on ideal body weight, which is basically a reference weight for your height. And so I do find those useful. And there is a calorie value that you can calculate from that, but I don't know that that's really that helpful. So I'm usually not looking at the calorie portion.
Okay. So in terms of like, if someone does want to, figure out like how many, the percentage of macros they should be using a day, like you don't necessarily think that they need to increase it or decrease it from the 40, 30, 30 split, like depending upon their goal, whether it's losing fat or maintaining or gaining muscle. You would just say more or less, like if you want to, lose fat, you would just do less of a 40, 30, 30 split. If you want to, gain muscle, do more of a 40, 30, 30 split. If you want to maintain, then, figure out what it is that you need to maintain within that split, and then just kind of keep your overall, I want to say, I don't want to say calories anymore, but your food intake the same.
Well, so the reality is every single person out there has the exact same goal. Always, all the time, 100% forever. As much muscle as possible, as little fat as possible. Like, you have the same goal, I have the same goal all the time, every day. More lean mass, less fat mass. Everyone who sees me who doesn't even think they have that goal, but they're like a diabetic, they really have that goal because their metabolic health is the same thing as body composition. So they want more lean mass, less fat mass. And in order to achieve that, you want to push the protein percentage of your diet as high as you can stand, and pull down the carb and fat percentage of your diet as low as you can stand. And that's what the PE diet was all about. It's just like trying to, in a Sisyphean way, constantly get the protein percent a little higher, carb and fats a little lower. Very hard to do. So you're striving for this basically zone where your protein percent is a little higher than carb or fat percent. So maybe that's the 40, 30, 30 is your goal, but it's difficult to achieve that and very difficult to maintain that. So you want to get as close to that as you can pretty much all the time, just so you can be like perma-lean and main gaining. So you're constantly trying to get a little more muscle, a little less fat in this struggle to keep the protein percent a little higher, carb and fat a little bit lower. So there's really not this, like, I'm not saying, oh, you're slightly cutting this week and you're slightly bulking this week, and so here are your macros. No, of course, I'm not like a bodybuilding prep coach or anything like that, where it would get a lot more extreme as you go. But it's basically like Sisyphean, everybody all the time. Try to push up the protein percent, try to pull back on the carb and fat percent. And that's universal.
And so would you do this like 40, 30, 30 split, like evenly throughout the day? Meaning like, say if you did have, 3 to 4 meals a day, every single meal would be 40, 30, 30. Or is it okay if say like, one meal is 50, 25, 25, another meal is, 30, 40, 30, and then overall throughout the day, it ends up being 40, 30, 30? Or do you really try for yourself and for people that you coach to just do like 40, 30, 30, like continuously throughout the day?
Oh, no, no, no. You can definitely break it up. So my style is hit that protein goal early, and then you've got room in your macros at the end of the day to just eat like a donut or some perhaps even abject garbage, which is probably 10 to 20% of my calories. So I know you absolutely do not have to maintain that for every meal. That's now you could, if you were really strict or you really have this, if you're in bodybuilding prep or something, you might want to try to do that. But even then, you have room to eat something that's just pure protein, maybe earlier was usually my advice, and then something that's pure energy later on. So yeah, no, it comes down to a per day, in my opinion, more than per meal.
Okay. And then what about with your workouts? Like after a workout, do you believe in, say, like, having some fast acting protein like whey, and then also having some carbohydrates after to replenish it? Or do you feel like, as long as you're hitting your overall 40, 30, 30 throughout the day, then that kind of 2-hour window doesn't really matter?
Yeah, I'm not really worried about the timing that much. I try to get at least, 2 protein boluses in a day, somewhere near the beginning and near the end of my eating window. But other than that, I'm not micromanaging a lot of timing stuff. Like I'm not, feeling like I have to get carbs in right for my workout. I have to get protein before and then after. I'm not doing any kind of micromanaging on the timing like that. Really, it's basically, for me, it comes down to a per day with a caveat of I might want to have 2 protein boluses instead of 1.
Okay. So as long as, you're hitting like your overall protein intake, it doesn't really matter, how many servings you have per day. Probably don't want to have it in one. That may be, not the best way to do it. But certainly if you have it in 2, doesn't really make a big difference, whether have it in 2 boluses or say, 3 to 5 boluses.
Right. The only time it gets critical is in bodybuilding prep where you're, extraordinarily lean. And the reason they're eating every, 4 hours is because they don't have enough energy availability on their body and their fat cells. So they will start breaking down muscle if they're not like eating pretty frequently. So that's very extreme. 99.99% of people are never going to have to worry about that. Most people could probably get it done with 1 meal a day if they had to, although I think 2 is better and 3, which is more average, is totally fine. So for me, it's mostly a per day. I don't get super stressed out about any intraday timing unless somebody has like some extreme goals, and then they're usually seeing a bodybuilding prep coach instead of me anyway. So yeah, like it's per day for me, and the details of where those land is not as big a deal for me. I do prefer that people front load the protein. That is kind of evidence-based, just because you're less likely to eat downstream. Like, if I start out my day with donuts and I just eat donuts, cake, cookie, candy, and then at the very end of the day, I'm like, well, I better drink a protein shake because I didn't hit my protein goal. Okay, I'm going to way overeat calories. That's going to be a total fail. Versus if I, drink that protein shake first thing in the morning, I'm just going to automatically eat 300 calories less from carbs and fats that day because I'm not that hungry anymore. So you really want to front load the protein. You're better off front loading things like protein and fiber and water and things with a high weight and volume, things with lower caloric density. You're better off eating the just pure garbage, pure energy, high energy density carbs and fats like your donuts and things like that later in the day as a dessert, after a meal, after you've hit your targets for protein and fiber and weight and volume. So I really definitely do like to front load the protein just from a satiety per calorie standpoint, not really any other particular reason.
Okay. And so for like the carbohydrates, like you don't necessarily believe that you should, eat more, say at, earlier in the day or later in the day. Like some people like to eat some carbohydrates later in the day because they think that it makes them sleep better. Some people believe that you should eat some, carbohydrates a little bit earlier in the morning, because I know there's some ambiguity on this, but from my understanding, this is what a fella, Alex Leaf, told me last week when he was on the podcast. He was indicating that and again, this is probably, something that's, probably not going to make a huge difference overall, but for lean people, generally they actually have better insulin sensitivity later in the day, whereas people who are less lean have more insulin sensitivity early in their day. So, maybe front loading the carbs with people who are not so lean would be good early in the day. And if you're lean, to eat them later in the day. Do you think that's just kind of getting a little bit too much into the sort of things that don't really matter too much, into the minutia, so to speak?
A little bit, yeah. So part of the reason why an overweight person might be more insulin sensitive in the morning is just because their liver glycogen has drifted down during their overnight fast. So any testing you do on them in terms of insulin sensitivity, they're going to look a little better in the morning than they will at the end of the day. But for me, it's really more about the big satiety per calorie picture. How are you going to get this person enough protein and fiber so they're just not that hungry and they're just not going to overeat? And I'm more worried about that than anything else. So for me, I'd rather have this person eat protein and fiber and have this satiety and be full and eat less and not be in their pantry at 10 o'clock at night eating crackers. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not going to say you need to just start the day out with carbs because you're overweight and you're going to be more insulin sensitive. If I do an insulin, like if I do some fancy lab insulin clamp test on you, yes, you'll be more insulin sensitive in the morning. But that doesn't really mean you're going to eat less and be thinner at the end of the day if you eat your carbs first thing. So that's really just more of a on paper, how insulin sensitive do you look if someone's testing you? It's not that practical. So no, I wouldn't say, oh, if you're really thin, eat your carbs at night, and if you're really fat, eat your carbs in the morning. That's definitely not helpful in my opinion. So I think that is definitely splitting hairs too finely and not that helpful. To me, it's more like what is going to give you the highest satiety per calorie by the end of the day? What is going to have you feeling full and getting everything you need, but eating less calories? And I don't think starting your day out with just all your carbs is going to be the best for that. No matter what the lab insulin sensitivity is for persons of different body compositions at different times of the day. So having said that, there is carbohydrate does have some strategy elements because it's so rapid, because it rapidly does things in your body. It might be smart to use carbs as a preload, before your workout. You're actually going to perform a little better. That's evidence-based. Might, for some people who don't sleep well, if they're very glycogen depleted, maybe eating some of those carbs at bedtime or later in the evening is a better thing. You get more of a rest and digest parasympathetic state. So I do think being strategic with carbs are good. I don't like them, as the first thing in the morning, the only thing you're eating, because some people will have like some hypoglycemia a few hours later and they might be hungrier and just end up eating more in that day. So my advice is front load more of the protein for a overall per day satiety calorie effect. Use the carbs strategically, either pre-workout to have a ergogenic effect, maybe post-workout to speed up recovery, maybe at bedtime to trigger a parasympathetic rest and digest state. So that's what I like to do with carbs. Fat, it literally doesn't matter. It's so passive and it takes so long to absorb it and send it anywhere that literally doesn't matter to me, where people are putting the fat in as much. So it's for me, it's front load protein and fiber for satiety per calorie. Use carbs strategically, peri-workout, before or after workout, bedtime, whatever you like. Not that big a deal. And I'm definitely not looking at, your whole body insulin sensitivity at different times of the day as in terms of telling you when to eat carbs, because the big picture is I just want you thinner, and then you're going to be more insulin sensitive 24 hours a day, no matter what.
And you mentioned fiber there a few times. Do you ever add psyllium husk to your diet, or do you just get fiber, say, from your food?
Yeah, no, I'm all about the food. Part of the magic of fiber is it increases oral processing time. You have to chew it more, and it takes longer to eat. And that's so valuable that you don't want psyllium husk. You want to just make yourself eat a half a pound of carrots as a snack or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Eat eat a whole jicama, eat a bunch of carrots or something that takes a lot of chewing, oral processing time, slows down your rate of eating, slows down your rate of digestion, gives you all this weight and volume in your small intestine to trigger this natural GLP-1. And you're not getting a lot of that or hardly any of that from psyllium husk or something powdered. So I don't think that's as helpful. I don't use it. I don't recommend it. I mean, it's fine if you want to, but that's not like my go-to.
Okay. So in terms of, protein, carbohydrates, and fats, like maybe we can go through each one and like what sources you generally use. So let's start with protein. Do you mostly get it from beef, eggs, whey protein? Like, what do you think are the sources of protein people should be eating?
So there's pretty much only 3 good sources of protein on Earth. Number 1, animal flesh, right? I don't care. Beef, chicken, pork, fish, seafood. You just eat an animal. Personally, my advice is when you're buying proteins, get the leanest thing you can reasonably get. Why is that? Because you're going to add a bunch of fat and carbs to it in the cooking process. You're going to cook it in fat. You're going to add a sauce. You're going to add some cheese. You're going to throw in some, croutons. You're adding carbs and fats the whole process. So if you start with the fattiest protein you can possibly get, it's just downhill from there, and you're kind of screwed. You start with the leanest protein. You can always just add sauces and oil and butter and you name it. And so number 1, animal flesh, any kind of animal, leanest thing you can reasonably get. When I buy ground beef, I just buy the leanest thing they've got. If I'm buying chicken, I frequently get, skinless chicken thighs, chicken breasts. If I'm buying fish and I can get wild over farm, that's, better. The second one is animal reproductive products, and that's eggs and dairy. And again, I try to get the leanest thing I can. Eggs are awesome. Even better is, 2 eggs and 2 egg whites. Milk is cool, but even better is your ultra filtered Fairlife milk that's lactose free, very low carb, fat free. You know what I'm saying? So I tend to get the low fat Greek yogurt, the non-fat Greek yogurt, the low fat cottage cheese, the low fat cheese. So eggs and dairy, animal reproductive products. And then in the plant world, there's just one, and that is plant reproductive products, which is seeds of some kind. That includes legumes, which are probably the best. So basically anything legumes, soybeans, your best plant option. So that's, soybeans, edamame, tofu, tempeh, seitan, something made out of legumes, or, black beans or lentils or that kind of thing. So for me, those are all your proteins. It's basically eat an animal flesh. The leanest, most properly raised thing you can get is typically the best. Eggs and dairy, again, a leaner is better because you can always add fat and carbs, no problem. And then legumes, that's pretty much the winner in the plant world. And that's where I'm at.
And so you don't consume any whey protein ever?
Oh, I do. Yeah, no, I absolutely. To me, that's just low fat dairy. So
Right.
whey, casein, I perfectly good with that. I like protein
Do you
powders.
take the casein before bed or anything like that? Do you use that strategy or?
I'm not really doing that intentionally. I will say that if I'm baking some sort of protein based treat, if I'm I do like a whey casein blend just for baking properties. But I'm not like, wow, I'm going to drink the whey right for my workout because boom, the aminos hit my bloodstream in 15 minutes. And I'm going to have this casein right at bedtime because then it's going to bleed aminos out and from my intestine for hours. Now, if I was like, elite bodybuilder doing a show prep, yeah, I would actually probably do both of those things. But because I'm just like an average loser, I'm not like really having to use my whey in the morning and my casein at bedtime. Although there's nothing wrong with that. That's a perfectly good strategy. For me, it's just more like, which one bakes better. And then which one does, I'll just use the isopure whey if I'm dissolving it in water because it just dissolves better. Or I'll use the casein whey blend if I'm baking or something like that.
Okay, cool. All right. So we talked about protein and, the best sources. What are the best sources of carbohydrates?
So personally, I like anything that has some fiber in it. And my very favorites are number one, fruit, and number two, tubers. So fruit and tubers are mostly what I'm eating. In fact, when I think about like the vegetables I eat,
tubers are, because people may not be familiar with that term.
Oh, tuber. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, like something underground, like a potato or a carrot or that kind of thing.
Do you favor sweet potato over regular potato, or not really?
I eat plenty of both. I'm usually cooking it in a way that's not adding a bunch of fat. So instead of French fries, I'm having like, French fries in the air fryer where I'm, using minimal added fat. And but I like sweet potatoes. I like regular potatoes. They're both great. I'm pretty much eating any kind of tuber type thing. Fruit is probably my favorite. Even the vegetables that I eat are really fruit. They're like avocados and peppers and cucumbers and tomatoes, and botanically fruit as well. So I'm mostly fruit, and tubers are my carbs, although I do eat some whole grains like steel cut oats and air popped popcorn, and these are pretty reasonably good too.
I haven't heard you say rice. Is that not on your list? And
oh yeah, no, I eat rice. Yeah, absolutely.
Even white rice, which doesn't have much fiber, or
I prefer brown rice. If I can get brown rice, I'm going for that. Wild rice is awesome. Brown rice is good. White rice is not as good. So that's, but I will eat some. And again, I'm just trying not to add a lot of fat to it. And then it's a perfectly okay-ish carb source. But, brown is better.
Okay. And so, basically, I think one of the messages there is also try to stay away from simple carbohydrates. I mean, obviously, like you said, you kind of mentioned, a few times throughout the show that like sometimes you do cheat and have something and it's not really a big deal because as long as you're hitting, your 40, 30, 30 macros and training and all that kind of stuff. But overall, like you do try to stay away from simple sugars. Is that correct?
Right. I'm basically ratioing it. It's like, okay, here's your sugar and here's your, skinless chicken breast and salad. And so instead of eating like, 50 pounds of sugar and a tiny cube of chicken and lettuce, I'm eating like 50 pounds of skinless chicken breast and salad and then a little bit of sugar. So nothing's off limits to me. I'm trying not to be super orthorexic and religious and say this is good and this is bad. There's foods with higher satiety per calorie, protein, fiber, and foods with lower satiety per calorie, maybe just pure refined carbs and fats mixed together in this super hedonic, addictive, dopamine spiking donut thing. And so I'm just trying to ratio those. Like, the donut is getting a 0 satiety per calorie score. And the skinless chicken breast and the salad is getting like a 90. And so I'm just trying to front load the higher satiety per calorie foods, eat more of them, ratio them higher. But like nothing's off limits and they do all have a place in there somewhere. And I'm trying to be able to, go out and eat socially and enjoy stuff and try stuff and not be orthorexic. And for me, it's just nailing this stuff earlier in the day. And then having a donut or, whatever without having to be religious.
Okay. So just kind of a good, solid approach overall, not staying too dogmatic to anything. So let's do the final macronutrient, fats. What do your fats look like?
All right. So fat to me is a lot more passive. It's not as critical in terms of timing. There's really no ergonomic benefit to timing your fats in any particular way. So for me, it's mostly what comes along for the ride with the other foods. So like if I'm eating like avocado, I'm going to get fat there. If I'm eating any kind of animal protein, I'm getting a fair amount of fat there. And so most of my fats honestly come from either an oil that I'm cooking something in, usually olive or avocado, some sort of fruit oil, or in the meat that I'm eating, or in the dairy or eggs that I'm eating, or in the nuts and seeds that I eat, or some of the higher fat fruits like avocado. And that's mostly where I'm getting my fat. And then, of course, like, whatever junk food might sneak in there is usually 50-50 carbs and fats. So, but yeah, I'm usually not like intentionally adding a fat source because there's so much fat in all of my proteins, and it's usually just comes along for the ride.
Yeah, I'm the exact same way. I get my fats from my meat that I eat every day, and then also from my eggs that I eat every day. So there's not like too much like extra room necessarily like to add fats in. The rare time if I'm going to make a salad or something like that, I will use olive oil. And then, like you said too, if I'm going to use any cooking oil, I use avocado oil. But it's just one of those spray bottles, so like there's hardly any fat, in that. But I don't necessarily see the, need to necessarily like add fats overall because, you do want to stay within like, a good ratio, like you're saying is, and like adding calories is just not really beneficial for, 99.9% of people. Like I said, unless you're, in some kind of contest prep or something and, you need some extra calories during a gaining phase or something like that. In terms of like fish oil, do you supplement with fish oil or do you just try to get it from fats? Have you ever tested your omega 6:3 ratio?
I never take any supplements, pretty much of any kind, honestly. I what I do is I just have a ton of canned fish in my pantry. I like this sort of smoked canned fish, so I have like sardines and various types of like smoked canned fish in the pantry, and I'll just grab one of those and eat it as a snack. And so I'm eating, I wouldn't say one a day, but pretty close to that. And then it's a lot more protein that way. It's a lot more eating and oral processing time, and it's a lot more weight and volume. And so because I'm getting so many other good beneficial things along with the ride, for me that's better than taking like a fish oil capsule. So yeah, I'm just eating basically canned fish, usually smoked, small, like those kippered fish things that you can buy, or some sort of sardines or something like that. That's mostly where I'm getting my fish oil. Never checked my numbers because like I just, it's not going to be helpful. I just assume it's not as high as I want, and I should remember to eat more fish. The end.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, maybe we're getting into, some minutia again here now. And I never tested it in my life. I'm 40 years old until recently. And then my ratio came out to 6:1. And so I was a little bit, I guess, disappointed because I wanted it to be, 2:1 or at least like 4:1. One thing that I think I was doing too much of was sometimes I was just eating like almond butter, like out of the jar, like a pig sometimes. And so I stopped doing that. And then I switched over to macadamia nut butter for the most part. And then also, not that I was eating too many almonds, but I switched over to macadamia nuts as well, just because they have like almost zero omega 6s in them. And then I did increase my fish oil content. So, I doubled that. And then I almost overshot where now it was like, I tested it recently. It was almost like 1.5 omega 6 to omega 3. So, but again, how much healthier am I by having, a 1.5 to a 1 ratio versus a 6:1 ratio? Maybe a little bit, but, there's no real, I guess, super strong data to indicate that, it makes a big difference overall.
Yeah. I'm probably not going to test mine. I just basically, when it comes to tests like that, I just assume I did it. It sucked, and I just need to be a little better. And that's saving me, $50 or whatever.
Well, let's talk about another topic I know that you like to talk about, and maybe some of the tests associated with it. So insulin resistance. And so maybe before I ask you about, the tests that are associated with that and, what we usually test for our patients and what the best tests are, just explain for people what is insulin resistance and why people should care about it.
Got it. So insulin resistance is basically how much storage headroom you have left in your body for carbs and fats. So there is no storage in your body for protein, but you store carbs in your liver and in your muscles, and you have maybe 100 grams in your liver and 300 grams in your muscles. So not a ton of room there. And then you've got like a bunch of fat cells in your body, but what you might not know is that your fat cells all have a maximum diameter that they cannot exceed. And there's also a genetically determined maximum number of new fat cells you can sprout. So you can absolutely max out all of your fat storage available on your body. So if I can only have, 1 million fat cells and I've already generated them all, and they can only get 200 microns in diameter and they're already 199 microns in diameter. What happens when I eat more fat? Well, it just circulates in my bloodstream forever because none of my cells will take it up. My liver won't take it. My muscles won't take it. My fat cells won't take it. Hell no. And so it just circulates in my bloodstream. And now my pancreas, which is like trying to keep the fuels regulated in the bloodstream. Anytime the fuels are too high, pancreas tries to pump out more and more insulin to clear the fuels out to get it to go into the cells. Well, none of my cells are taking that because they're all full. They literally can't, even if they wanted to. So my pancreas just pumped out more and more and more insulin. But still, my triglycerides are way too high. That's the first thing that goes up when you're insulin resistant. Well, the first easily measurable thing. And then later on, my glucose is too high. And now I'm fully diabetic, which is like end stage insulin resistance. Type 2 diabetes is like the final boss of insulin resistance, where now there's just too much glucose in your bloodstream. Your pancreas hates that. It's freaking out. It's redlined on pumping out insulin, but it's not working because your body's just too full of non-protein energy, carbs and fats. So insulin resistance is literally just over fatness. It's pure body composition. So you know how you want to look better naked by having more muscle and less fat. Metabolic health is exactly the same. If you have more muscle and less fat, you're super insulin sensitive. If I'm a bodybuilder doing show prep and I've got a ton of muscle and all my fat cells are just shrunk down and deflated, I eat a donut and my fat cells hoover all those calories right out of my bloodstream on the very first pass, and they're gone. I have almost no insulin being secreted all the time because my fuels are all super low. If I eat anything, they're gone. And so I'm extraordinarily insulin sensitive because I have tons of muscle that's fairly depleted because I'm doing all these glycogen depletion workouts and eating hardly any carbs. I have tons of deflated fat cells with huge headroom to store stuff. So I'm exquisitely insulin sensitive. On the flip side, if I'm just super over fat, I can't even get fatter. And if I do eat more fat, it just gets shoved into my liver and my pancreas and my other organs. I got visceral fat. I got ectopic fat. Everything's as loaded with fat as it can get. But then I eat a donut and that fat just builds up in my bloodstream. Now my fasting triglycerides are 500. Now they're 1,000. Now they're 10,000. And now I'm a raging diabetic where my blood sugar is like 500. So insulin resistance is literally just how much storage headroom is physically in your body based on your body composition. And it's the fullness of your fat cells, the liver, and muscle. Now you can, if I ran a marathon and depleted all the glycogen in my liver and my muscles, I'm instantly more insulin sensitive, but only a little bit because I can only fit a couple 100 grams of carbs in there. And then I'm insulin resistant again after I eat. And so it's the big picture is how full or empty your fat cells are. The smaller contributor is how full or empty your liver and your muscles are, which is basically fasting or exercise.
Okay. And so getting back to the test, I mean, you just said a moment ago that the first thing that's going to go up when you're insulin resistant are your triglycerides. Do you use just the triglycerides as a first indicator, or do you look at the triglyceride to HDL ratio? And is that your favorite test for insulin resistance?
My favorite off-the-shelf test for insulin resistance is fasting triglycerides. Fasting insulin is pretty okay, but the problem with fasting insulin is it's wildly dynamic. It has a half-life of like 1 minute. It's extraordinarily dynamic. And if someone's been overeating for a few days before the test, it'll look double or triple worse than it ordinarily would. Or if you're super fasting or really cutting hard for just a few days, it'll be, an order of magnitude lower than it was last week. So it's so incredibly dynamic with such an incredibly short half-life that it's just not that helpful Plus, at most places, it's a send out. It's more expensive. It's not that valuable. You're almost better off with just a waist to height ratio, waist circumference at the belly button divided by your height. You want that to be less than 0.5. That costs you nothing. But then, like if we're talking lab tests, fasting triglyceride is my favorite off the shelf test for most people. And I apologize because here in America, we've got like freaking milligrams per deciliter. So basically here in America, you want your fasting triglycerides to be under 100 milligrams per deciliter. And the conversion is not that great. So.
Okay, so you don't really look at the ratio of the triglycerides to HDL as much as just the triglycerides itself, like meaning like say if someone has super low triglycerides, but they're also someone who has like, fairly low HDL. So say, they're in like a 1-to-1 ratio, but overall, their triglycerides are still, super low overall. Again, I know Canadians and Americans have different, we use different numerical systems, which is so annoying.
It's terrible. It's our fault.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll have to have that debate someday for sure. But, overall, you do think that your fasting triglyceride is a better indicator overall than looking at your triglyceride to HDL ratio?
Well, the problem with HDL is it's racist as hell. So if you're from Northeastern Europe, like you or me, you can get a really high HDL. If you're super lean and exercising and eating right, you could get HDL to 60, 70, 80. I mean, I think I've hit a 80 or 90 on a HDL before, but if you're from Southeast Asia, if you're of Southeast Asian descent, if you're from India, if you're from somewhere over there, then you're maybe if you're absolutely elite, you'll hit a 40 HDL, but you're just walking around at a 30 if you're an average person, and you're like 20s if you're insulin resistant. So there's a lot of ethnic variation to HDL, but as long as you can just kind of see through that and kind of understand the racial and ethnic differences there, then yes, I do like triglyceride to HDL ratio in general. But because HDL tends to be so varied in different demographics in ethnic and racial groups, then I kind of prefer triglycerides because that's a little more universal. And also, as your triglycerides get lower and lower, your HDL is going to be just naturally at the higher end of whatever that genetic bracketing is for you. You know what I mean? Yeah. So at that point, it doesn't really matter because your triglycerides are super high. Your HDL is going to be low for you, which might still be high for some. Like, if you're a Northeastern European descent and you have HDL of, 40 or something, that's still okay on paper, but then it's like low for you because you really want to be an 80. So that's, I guess what I'm saying is I like triglyceride because it's a little more universal. And besides, if your triglycerides are super low, your HDL is going to be high for you, at least. And if your triglycerides are super high, your HDL is going to be low. So it's almost redundant.
Yeah. And so you don't need to worry as much about, your fasting insulin and say your fasting glucose and that test, the HOMO-IR, the homeostatic model assessment, insulin resistance test. Like you don't look at that as much because it's not as static per se. Because again, you're in that test. Obviously, I should explain this. That you're using two different variables there. So using your fasting insulin and your fasting glucose to calculate that the HOMO-IR test. Whereas with your triglycerides, they're going to be more consistent throughout as long as, you do your proper fasting before you do your test, which obviously can affect your triglycerides as well. But it's just more of like a longer biomarker. So therefore, it's just a better insulin resistance marker overall. Is that kind of how you see it?
Right. So there, HOMO-IR is cool where you're multiplying your fasting insulin by your fasting glucose. But again, like I said, the fasting insulin has this crazy day-to-day variability. And then glucose is a little weird because if you're very fat adapted, your fasting glucose is at the absolute upper end of the normal range. Like if I'm doing a zero carb carnivore thing, I'm waking up every day with a glucose of 99. It's like absolutely at the highest end. But if I'm in carbosis, where I'm just a very low fat vegan and I'm a fruitarian and I'm just living off of 30 bananas a day, when I wake up in the morning, my liver, I'm so dependent on that liver glycogen. In the morning, my fasting glucose is a 70 or a 69 or a 68. So both of these people will have the same A1C of 5.0%. But the keto carnivore person wakes up every day with a glucose of 100, and the 30 bananas a day low fat vegan is waking up with a glucose of 70. And they might both have identical insulin sensitivity, identical A1C, identical metabolic health. So to me, fasting glucose is very dependent on where you're getting your energy source from. And also, insulin is so crazy variable on, so you can double it by just overeating the day before. You can cut it in half by just fasting the day before. That's not that helpful to me. Waist circumference is something that's way more like a longer term marker. You know what I mean? Triglycerides also a little harder to influence that way, although you can absolutely radically change your triglycerides within just a few days of overeating or undereating. But I still think triglycerides are a little bit better. And so there's a triglyceride glucose index where you multiply your triglycerides by your glucose. But again, it's a little bit fraught with the glucose issue of, are you very low carb or very low fat? And so, well, these are cool tests and I do like them and they are interesting. Probably the most universal for me is just looking at fasting triglycerides, because it doesn't matter whether you're ultra low carb or ultra low fat. It doesn't matter what your racial or ethnic background is. It's going to just apply more generally, if you know what I mean.
What about the hemoglobin A1C? Because, I think that's a great test, but I have seen people who have, and I'm, one of them to a certain degree, will have like, a ridiculous fasting insulin, like a ridiculous HOMO IR test, but A1C might be like 5.3, 5.4, like, which is solid, but not necessarily like, ridiculous. Is that something that people should be worried about, or is that something that you wouldn't worry about if your insulin sensitivity is still, excellent overall?
Yeah, there's definitely some genetic factors there. And some people do have a longer red cell lifespan. If you have a different hemoglobin makeup, you might have like you might live at a higher or lower end of the bell curve of A1C. So and as long as you're anywhere in the normal range, I'm not going to ultra sweat that. I'm not going to say that somebody who has really low triglycerides, really low waist to height ratio, really good body composition, but they just live with an A1C of 5.5%. I'm not going to think that they're necessarily more likely to get, diabetic neuropathy than somebody who just naturally is at a 4.5. I mean, and we see so many people who are, just extreme alcoholics and their A1C is, 4.0, 3.9. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But like, is that really, should that be your only goal, your only metric? I feel very strongly that you do want an A1C in the normal range. You don't want to be above or below that. But within the normal range, I'm not necessarily giving somebody a ton of extra points if they just happen to hang out in the higher or lower end, because a lot of that is genetic. And there is a genetic bracketing where you will be within. And for some people, it's a little higher. And for some people, it's a little lower. So you can't necessarily universally equate that. But then again, that's true of everything, where some people are just going to tend to be a little higher or lower for whatever marker, even triglycerides. But I do love A1C. I am doing it on everyone. In America, 52% of adult Americans are pre-diabetic or diabetic. So it's actually the minority of people who I see who have an A1C less than 5.7%. And so I'm doing A1Cs on everybody all the time because everybody's diabetic now. It's great. It's great for business for us.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, I don't know if you guys use a different range, and I've heard, people say, 5.7 is sort of the cutoff for being, metabolically healthy overall. There's more to being metabolically healthy than just your A1C. But we actually use 6.0 as pre-diabetic. Do you guys use 5.7?
Oh, yeah. Actually, here it's 4.0 to 5.6 is normal. 5.7 to 6.4 is pre-diabetic. And at a 6.5 or higher, you're diabetic. So I guess that is a little bit different.
Yeah, that's good to know. You guys have a little bit different standards there, which is good. It's good to have better standards overall. Okay, well, I think we kind of hit the insulin sensitivity really good there, and I know we only have a few minutes left, and I did want to ask you a little bit about training, because I know that this is another passion of yours and something that you're an expert in, or I believe you're an expert in anyway. So in terms of what you recommend to patients overall, is it usually like a 50-50 split between cardio and weights?
Yeah, I definitely think everybody should be doing both. You really don't want to be just doing one or the other, for sure.
Okay. And so in terms of, that split, do you ever recommend doing them on the same day, or do you try to get people to do them on different days overall?
There is a little bit of an interference effect, but it's going to be so small for the average person that I'm not that worried about it. Again, unless you're just a bodybuilder in prep who's shaving their calories way down. And then you might want to separate them a little bit. But for your average person, doesn't really matter to me. You have to be aware of the fact, though, that if you do your cardio first, you're not going to be able to have quite the same workload when you do your resistance after that. So I kind of like resistance first. Yeah. I'm prioritizing that. If you're going to do resistance and cardio on the same day, I kind of like resistance first and then cardio second. Because the resistance, it's absolutely critical that you do the hardest, heaviest lift you can and get that workload up, because you'll get better results. You're trying to send this stimulus. On the cardio side, you just have to basically tax your system, and it's not as mission critical, I think, unless you're training for a race or something. So I would probably, for most people, do resistance first. And then if you do them same day, who cares?
Okay. Let's just maybe talk a little bit about each one of those. So in terms of resistance training, people should really focus more on compound movements and, what's like the ideal rep range do you believe overall? And do you kind of like, measure how many seconds there are between sets and that kind of thing? Or how do you try to get people to train, and how do you train yourself?
Got it. So there's basically, 4 moves, really. There's an upper body pushing and pulling. There's a lower body pushing and pulling. Upper body push might be an overhead press, or a handstand push-up, or a pike push-up, or a regular push-up. Upper body pull would be like a row, a pull down, a pull up, something where you're pulling. Lower body push is any kind of squat or lunge, Bulgarian split squat, lunges, squats. And then a lower body pull is basically a hamstring type thing, a Romanian deadlift, what other people might call a hinge movement. So I'm really trying to do the 4 movements: upper body push, upper body pull, lower body push, lower body pull. And in terms of rep range, you can get hypertrophy anywhere from like 3 to 30 reps. It's just absolutely crazy. But there's kind of a sweet spot. So you really want to get stronger, but you also want to get bigger, and you're trying to maximize everything. You want more power, you want more strength, you want more size. And at the lower end, you get more strength. And at the higher end, you get more muscular endurance. And you do kind of want both. And then like somewhere in the middle, you get a little bit of everything. And if you just put a gun to my head and said, what is the single best rep range or rep specific number for anyone who's trying to get it all, like, maximize a strength, hypertrophy, power, endurance, everything, you definitely want to go to failure. And it's probably going to be around 6 to 8 reps to failure. It would be kind of like a good sweet spot if you're trying to get a little of everything. If you go higher, it takes longer. So
Right.
if you're doing 12 reps to failure, it's just going to take a little bit longer, and you're just going to get a little bit more lactic acid burn, and it's just not going to get you quite as much absolute strength for your like PRs or 1 rep max type thing. So you want to be a little lower than that. So like while it really doesn't matter, and we're just massively splitting hairs here, and it's far more important to just get out there and lift something, I do like that kind of like 6 to 8, or, I think in my book, I was like, 5 to 10 somewhere, it doesn't have to be that exact, but if you can't do 5 of them, it's probably too heavy. If you can just blow way past double digits, it's probably too light. And that 6 to 8, 85% of your 1 rep max is really good.
Yeah, I'm basically the exact same way. It's usually somewhere between 5 to 12. Sometimes if I'm doing exercise, like something like face pulls, where I'm really trying to, not necessarily like get stronger or build muscle or really do anything other than just try to like, fix my posture, to put it simply, then maybe I will, go a little bit on like the 15 to maybe even, 20 size. But again, that's not for any other reason, just other than like, I'm just trying to correct my posture and get my body kind of used to being in that position. But yeah, I've heard, Dr. Mike Israetel say, the same thing as you did, which I think surprises a lot of people, that, you can get the same amount of hypertrophy, whether it's like, 5 reps to 30 reps, which is just, such a wide range. But like you said too, no one really wants to do 30 reps on an exercise just because it's painful and time consuming. And so, somewhere in the middle range is better. And I do think maybe slightly more, in the 5 to 12, as opposed to say that 10 to 15 might be better, just because you are getting, more strength gains overall. So yeah, we definitely, align on that one. And so in terms of, how many days per week, like in your book, do you outline that, it should be, 1 day of weights, 1 day of cardio, like 3 times of each a week? And obviously some people are going to have, more time or less time to work out. And as you said, some people they may have to do their cardio and their weights on the same day. But how overall, like, how do you like to strategize your splits?
Right. So if you're just doing resistance maybe once a week, you could probably maintain your strength over time if you're taking it to failure. But twice a week is going to be better if you're trying to progress, and hopefully everybody is all the time. 3 times a week is even slightly better than that. And then the crazy part is that, you're trying to get in, at least half a dozen sets a week, and you could actually just divide them all out and do 1 set every day, which some people are like, oh, that's way too frequent. What about your recovery? Blah, blah, blah. You could just pretend you're doing 1 workout a week with 6 sets, and you just have a rest period between sets instead of 2 minutes or 3 minutes, 24 hours. You know what I'm saying? So like, it's like, I just do 1 workout a week, but I have a intraset rest time of 24 hours. And so I kind of like doing a single set any day I get a chance to. Like I'm not going to be like, well, let's see, I'm just sitting around, but I worked out yesterday and I'm going to work out tomorrow. So I guess I won't work out today. No, so I'm like, any day I get a chance, I'm going to do a set to failure of whatever I can reasonably do nearby, pushing, but push-ups, pull-ups, squats, something. And so I tend to like daily, just because higher frequencies is better than lower. Dividing your volume out into more days is better. And you do want more than just 1 or even 2 resistance training bouts per week. You know what I'm saying? More is better.
And I think it's, for me anyway, I find it just better overall for my mental health. I just like training. And so, taking like a day off is just so painful to me. I just don't like doing it. I know that our hour is just about up there. Do you have a couple more minutes, or do you have a hard stop?
I have all the time in the world. I'm not even on a schedule. So.
Okay, awesome. I did want to ask you about visceral fat. Like, are there any techniques at all that you can use to decrease visceral fat, say more than subcutaneous fat. And maybe before we even get into that, we should explain to people why visceral fat is so important.
Got it. So when you store fat, the first place fat usually goes is your subcutaneous fat cells. These are just under your skin, and subcutaneous fat is quite harmless. Typically, you can have a fair amount of it without any kind of metabolic hit. You're not really starting to get insulin resistant, and it's not that big a deal. Subcutaneous fat is it's a good thermal insulator. If you live at a higher latitude like Canada, you want a little bit, or you're going to freeze to death. It protects your bones and your organs. It's basically nothing but good. But as the subcutaneous fat cells approach their maximum diameter, you'll try to sprout more, but you're going to reach a limit to how much subcutaneous fat you can generate. Very genetic, of course. And then if your fat cells are full and you can't sprout anymore because your genetic bracket, now where's the fat going to go? Okay, now it has to go into your visceral fat. This is intra-abdominal fat. Definitely not good. And the reason it's not good is because it's a sign that you ran out of easy places to store fat. So your insulin will be higher. The tonic insulin load your body has to generate to get fat to go in those visceral cells is higher than subcutaneous, and you will just basically be insulin resistant. So it's basically a sign that you're insulin resistant. Now, as you fill up those visceral cells, you'll also start to run out of places there. And then the next place is ectopic fat, which is fat being shoved into your liver and into your pancreas and your organs and your blood vessels or anywhere else your body can find to put it. And once everything gets completely packed with fat, your muscles are packed with fat and they're marbled like a steak, and your liver's completely packed with fat like foie gras. Now you've got like extreme insulin resistance. Now you're type 2 diabetic. And basically, it's this cascade from subcutaneous cells to visceral fat cells to organs to fat shoved everywhere, and you're diabetic. And so visceral fat is really just a sign that you're over fat. You already filled up your subcutaneous fat. Now, when you start losing fat, it very nicely and appropriately and thankfully goes in reverse order, last in, first out. So that ectopic fat goes away first, then the liver fat, and then the subcutaneous fat kind of last. Of course, you're losing a little bit from all these places at the same time, but it's definitely a last in, first out scenario, which is why people who go on, you're like your Professor Roy Taylor MRI studies, people went on this ultra low liquid 800 calorie diet for 6 weeks, and they're non-diabetic. Their liver fat is gone in just a few weeks. They've only lost a couple of pounds of fat, but all that fat came out of their liver. And so you can reverse that liver fat super rapidly. And then next up is the visceral fat. Anytime you're losing fat, you're going to lose more visceral fat than subcutaneous fat. And so it is last in, first out. So you don't absolutely have to you actually can't do anything specific to lower visceral fat over subcutaneous fat other than just get thinner, and it will automatically come out of visceral first. Now, there's a tiny caveat where if your whole diet is nothing but fructose and alcohol, you're going to drive a lot more fatty liver, even if your subcutaneous fat cells have some room. So there are extremes. The three worst macros for basically fatty liver, even if you're not over fat, is alcohol, probably the worst. Fructose and saturated fat, all three of those are not good. So if my whole diet is just a slurry of alcohol, saturated fat, and fructose, I am going to have like a fatty liver, even if I'm not over fat. So that's one reason to possibly avoid those things more than anything else. This is kind of why the guidelines say that sugar shouldn't be more than 10% of your calories. Saturated fat shouldn't be more than 10% of your calories. You shouldn't have more than 1 or 2 drinks a day, because you can actually wreck your liver with these things, even at a fairly normal fatness, if you know what I'm saying. But for everybody else in all other normal circumstances, the visceral fat is going to be the last in, first out.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's interesting to know because, some people, or I've been asked that question a lot, are there any ways where I can, preferentially lose, say, like the visceral fat, because, visceral fat, has been shown, I think in some studies anyway, to be associated with a higher mortality overall. But essentially, that's just because those people in generally are obese, and obesity obviously is, linked overall for mortality. So the bottom line is, if you want to lower your visceral fat, just focus on, getting your body fat lower overall, and decreasing your caloric intake, increasing your energy expenditure, and it'll just kind of like take care of it itself. But you don't have to do anything specific or in particular to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's just be thinner. It's just have better body composition, which, as we mentioned, is everyone's goal all the time, forever, no matter what, in all circumstances anyway. So
yeah,
you don't have to worry about it.
Okay. I just got one more question there for you. And thanks so much again for, your time and going over the hour here today. Especially because you're, a family doc and you do what you do. What do you think of GLP-1s, and do you think that they're really good tools for patients?
So I do prescribe GLP-1s all the time, and I do appreciate those. To me, I wrote this book, Satiety per Calorie, and to me, GLP-1 is technically the ultimate in satiety per calorie. You're getting the very highest satiety signaling possible for actually 0 calories. So this is literally the highest satiety per calorie you can get. It definitely kind of supports the fact that satiety per calorie is one of the most important concepts when it comes to diet and body composition. So the GLP-1s, now obviously in a perfect world, nobody would be overfat. Everyone would have perfect body composition. Nobody would need it. But I live in reality. I'm down in the trenches with you, and I have patients who both their parents are morbidly obese. All their grandparents are morbidly obese. They were morbidly obese when they were 4 years old. They've literally never been a normal weight. They were obese as a child. They were super obese as a teenager. Their whole life, they've never had a BMI under, maybe 40, 50. Like crazy stuff. This is like my 600-pound life type things. And it's very, very genetic. And if, both your parents are morbidly obese, the deck is really stacked against you. And for some of these people, for them to just get down to 20% body fat, like a fairly healthy range, they have to just white knuckle and use as much willpower as I would have to do to just be like stage lean bodybuilding 6% body fat. You know what I'm saying? Their leptin will fall proportionally, and it's so hard for them to do that. And then their risk for regain is so high. So for people like that, I'm handing out GLP-1s like candy. I mean, anything, tirzepatide, of course, being my favorite. And we're just basically giving these to people who really haven't been able to pull it off with diet and exercise. And so it is the very powerful weapon. I do like these. I do prescribe them. I don't think it should just be in the groundwater, necessarily. But believe me, you and I are seeing every single day someone who is going to massively struggle for a lot of, genetic reasons. And it's a very, very helpful thing. So I do like them. I do prescribe them.
Yeah, no, I think they're great tools as well. And just so people know what GLP-1s are, just to preface, I think most people do, but, Ozempic was the first one to come around. And then you mentioned tirzepatide, I think I'm saying that right, or Mounjaro. So that's a GLP-1 plus a GIP. So the GLP-1, the action of that is, as we mentioned, it's going to decrease the hunger signaling, does have some positive effects with insulin as well. And then the GIP part of that one that's Mounjaro, which is even better than Ozempic, that can make your insulin more sensitive. And then, coming down the line, although I think some people are, using it when it's not been prescribed, is something called retatrutide, which acts on your glucagon receptor, which is kind of interesting because, we think glucagon, raises your blood sugar, it does, but also it has this fatty acid oxidation effect where it's basically just, burning calories without necessarily even, increasing your overall energy expenditure. So it's essentially burning calories for you, which is insane. And then because, you have the GLP and the GIP on board, it's just going to counteract any negative effect or any increase in the blood sugar overall that gets acted on from the glucagon receptor. So, just wild, how effective these medications can be. And like yourself, I've seen like hemoglobin A1Cs that are like, sky high, like 14 or something ridiculous. And they'll come down to like 8, within just like, 3 months or less, which is, absolutely wild. And so, I do think that they do have their place in medicine. And so, it's good to, hear more physicians, I think, positively talk about this, because for whatever reason, and, I think initially when they came out, there was a lot of negative press about it. But I found that recently, like even, people who are kind of into fitness, into bodybuilding, and those I think a lot were the people who were, dead set against it at first, are now kind of getting on board with it. And it does have some, dramatic effects overall. I don't know if you want to comment on that anymore. Or...
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of people are like, well, no, just eat whole foods and all this, you should never eat anything processed. You should never take any drugs. That's kind of not going to age well, because, we're not going to get to Mars eating whole, unprocessed food. You know what I'm saying? And as we go forward as a society, I mean, these drugs are here to stay. This is the worst they'll ever be. Like 20% of Americans have used a GLP-1 now, and they will get better and better. And if humans have always used technology to feed ourselves. And so we invented fire because we got a higher nutrient yield from our food. And then we invented agriculture, and we invented industrial processing. We've done all these things to basically steer our nutrient intake, our calorie intake, our food. And this is kind of like, honestly, processed food will be higher and higher and higher percentage of everyone's calories going forward. You can't escape that. These drugs will be ubiquitous going forward. You're not going to escape that either. And just as humans literally evolved into cuisinivores, where we actually exist on cooked and processed food, all of these things are like slowly changing our genetic pool. And it's all here to stay. So you might as well get on board, or you're going to be like left behind like a troglodyte. It's just like AI, you really have to embrace it and keep moving forward. And so the sad reality is, because every single common medical problem you and I see improves with fat loss and better insulin sensitivity, you could probably get FDA approval for tirzepatide for every single medical condition there is. There's literally nothing that, except for anorexia nervosa or something. There's almost everything you and I are seeing, like your heartburn and your osteoarthritis and all of your autoimmune diseases. Everything's better with fat loss. You could probably get FDA approval for tirzepatide for insert any medical condition here, from like alcoholism to sleep apnea to osteoarthritis and autoimmune diseases. And pretty much you're going to get almost as much improvement from the fat loss as you would from whatever the best drug in class is for that condition. So it's kind of here to stay. It's just going to get bigger and bigger. I wouldn't really fight against it, because that's not going to age well. And instead you have to figure out how does this fit into my worldview? And if you're a satiety per calorie person like myself, it dovetails in there amazingly well. And so I am on board with these drugs, even though I totally admit in a perfect world, we would all just, eat whole foods and not take any drugs. And that would actually be better, but that's just not where we're at.
Yeah, no, we have to live in reality. And the reality is that, a lot of people do benefit from these drugs. So, I know I've taken more of your time than I asked for today. So thank you so much again for coming on. But please tell people where they can follow you online. Please tell people where they can buy your book and where they can learn more about you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. Great to talk to you. I'm at Ted Naiman on all the socials. I wrote 2 books, The PE Diet and Satiety per Calorie. They're both available anywhere books are sold. You can just Google them or buy them on Amazon. Or if you go to tednaiman.com, you can buy a Satiety per Calorie from me as a PDF, where I have a money back guarantee. If it's not the single best book you've ever read on the general principles of diet and exercise, I give you a full refund and you keep the book and you basically can't lose. So, yeah.
That's a pretty good deal. I've never heard one as good as that. So again, Ted, thank you so much for coming on. You shared so much good knowledge today, especially on the insulin resistance part and everything else that we discussed here today. So, I know that I learned a lot. I'm sure that people listening learned a lot too. So thank you so much again for coming on. And as always, thank you so much for everyone for listening. And I will be back with another episode soon.